We have identified these 3 blocks we wanted to get into. This comes in the context of Decision Accelerator's focus on context, priorities, best practices, and sustainability in terms of how you're going to pay for things. An Action Accelerator adds 2 components to that, the first of which is due diligence and the second of which is transformation management. Okay? This panel is about the due diligence. So you've identified the need. The question is, and we've even identified the need for collaboration, the question is, how equipped are we? Let's just say we could actually reach agreement. How the heck are we going to find how to get it done? How close are we to having what we need to get it done? And I will tell you that when we started to talk about that with people, asking who should do the presentation, everybody told me we had to get David Bellman to do the presentation. So if you get us started, David, I'd appreciate it.
All right, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. The reason that I've come up with this talk is it's kind of a funny story. I'm going to go quick because we don't have a ton of time here today. I found this book in the library of the Builders Association. It said, How to Build Your Dream Home for Less Than $3,500. And I said, what? How? Well, it was written in 1950, of course. And this was also explaining how you self-build the home. So it just got my mind really zoned in on this topic because I was like, how could you build a house for $3,500? So it really got me thinking of, well, how much was the average income back then? And then how much is the average house now and what's the average income now? And that's what kind of spurred this whole presentation. So the first thing I want to do is I want to start with defining housing affordability and affordable housing, because a lot of people don't distinguish these as 2 different things. So housing affordability is basically making all housing affordable. And that's really what I want to talk about. Whereas affordable housing is basically half the median income in an area that can afford a home, okay, which is still important, but I want to make sure that we make all housing affordable and attainable to everyone. So our kids and our generations coming after us can have the same opportunity that we had. So as part of the presentation, I kind of break it down into 3 sections. So I kind of want to talk about the history of housing a little bit and how it came to be. And then I want to talk about the challenges that we have and then the solutions that we can, adopt to hopefully improve our situation. So I want to take you back to the 1950s, right? Because that was where we got that house for $3,500. Now, the actual cost to build a house, if you hired a builder, was somewhere around $9,000. So if you think back, I always think of like Leave It to Beaver, right? Okay, it was a family, and it was the post-World War II era. There was a lot of emphasis on building homes to get all our troops back and get families settled. So they created these whole sets of regulations to promote more housing. Okay. And if you think back to these families, you had one worker and they had the wherewithal to buy a new home and then buy a new car and then buy all the appliances and buy the television. And they were able to do all that. Whereas nowadays, a young family just struggles even to afford the purchase of a home. So there's definitely a disparity here. And of course, when we look back at those 1950 standards, this would be like a typical 1950 subdivision, right? It's very square, it's flat. All the homes are nicely in a line in a row, and you're building on these nice flat lots. You got the wide streets, short setbacks, all that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, we cannot do that anymore these days because we're not building on these types of sites. These sites were built by schools and churches and libraries. And now we're building a lot of, random sites that they're hilly and they have a lot of terrain and all sorts of things like that. Okay. And then this would be like a typical, 1950s house, $9,000 for that house. The average income in 1950 was around $4,700. So for roughly twice your income, you could have a house like this, 2 times your income. Now we look at today's cost. The average new home is in Waukesha County. I looked this up through MLS, $697,335 for a new construction home average sale price in MLS in 2022. Okay, and we talked a little bit about what's the average income. Luckily, in the last 2 years, that has went up. It used to be in the $65,000 range. It's went up to $82,757 for average income. Okay, so what does that equalize out? 8.4 times your average income is what the cost of a new home is right now compared to the 1950s. So you can see that gap and that disparity happening here. Okay, so a couple quick things here. I've got some stats on here. I'm not going to go through all of it, but there's a huge gap forming between existing homes and new construction homes. In 2018, it was 49,000. Now it's nearly $100,000 from what I've seen so far. And construction costs have increased 33% just since the start of the pandemic. And since the early 2000s, our housing prices have increased nearly 60%. Now we want to talk about cost burden. And that's interesting as well. So that means that over half your income is going to your living expense for your home. There's 123,000 plus households in Wisconsin that are cost burden. Now I want to put this in terms of the whole state of Wisconsin so you guys can see this. So let's look here. Here is the city of Appleton and Sheboygan. If you take the entire population of those two cities, that's how many people are cost burden in the state of Wisconsin. 2 full cities. So we know there's a problem. Now we're going to talk about some of the challenges that I see as a developer and things that we face. And some of these I'm going to move through quickly because they're a little bit more national issues and maybe not something that we're going to solve today in this room. I'm just going to point them out, talk about them very quickly, and then we're going to move on. So I've created 12 challenges to housing affordability. So as we've kind of referenced, and we've kind of talked about this already, is the development standards, right? We talked about the 1950 standard. And the problem is we always kind of go back to, well, why do we do it that way? Well, that's because that's the way we've always done it. Of course, that's the mindset that's kind of hurting us right now because we're taking those 1950 standard, 66-foot wide roads and all these things that we put on the books back then, and we're trying to apply them to, instead of A sites like I was showing before, B and C sites that are hilly and they're wooded and they have wetland areas and all sorts of other challenges. It just doesn't work. And then, of course, what are we doing with new houses these days? With new houses, yeah, we have 75-foot setbacks. We have wider lots, bigger lots, more streets. And of course, most people now have 3, maybe even 4-car garages. So why do we need to park all our cars on the street when we've got a 75-foot long driveway and a 4-car garage? Why do we need all these big wide streets to park cars on when nobody parks their cars on the streets anymore? So that's some of the stuff that we have to kind of address and get through. The second thing is legislation. And unfortunately, we keep going the wrong direction with this as well. So if we look at a study, and I do have recent numbers here from NAHB. So in 2022, the cost added to a new home from local, state, and federal regulation was $93,870. That's before we even put a shovel in the ground. That's basically enough to buy like a brand new Corvette Stingray. So every time you buy a house or build a house. So obviously that's a huge challenge, and 2/3 of that cost is on the land development side. So obviously I think that's where we have some room to work with. Those costs continue to increase. In 2015, those costs went up 25%. And just in the short period of time, they've continued to go up. That used to be an 84,000 number. So we just continue to go the wrong direction with that number. And then what does this mean in terms of Wisconsin? Well, if you add $1,000 to the cost of a new home, back in 2020, it took out about 3,400 home buyers from even being able to afford a home. That's just $1,000. So now it's almost 4,300 home buyers in 2022 that are priced out of that home. So dollars matter. All right, we'll talk about impact fees. It's another favorite topic that we have, especially at our local home builders association. We've had some really, I think, very good meetings recently about that. Impact fees add a lot to the cost of a new home. Of course, the municipality wants to put those in place to maybe take care of improvements that are going to be needed in the future. But the challenge with impact fees is, one is, are they actually used for what they're supposed to do? Are they actually documented? And then in our group, we asked the question, because if they aren't used after a certain amount of time, they're supposed to get refunded. Well, we had 50 to 60 people in a room, and we asked the question, have any of you ever gotten a check back from municipality for impact fees? Raise your hand. And no hands went up. And so we're working through that a little bit as well. But some of these impact fees can add a lot to the cost of a home. They range from $2,000 to, I've paid one for $21,000 in the village of Heartland, just for permits and impact fees, which you just think of how much money and what that could have went to instead for the home. Okay. Another big challenge is skilled labor. And we've alluded to this already today, but roughly half our labor force left the industry in the Great Recession, 2007, 2008, 2009, however long that went on. And the problem is we're seeing the average age of our workers increase steadily. So the average age of a construction worker was 39 years old. It's now jumped to 42 and a half years old. And the average age of a builder is 59 and a half years old. All right. We're not replacing people in the skilled trades with younger people. We just keep trotting out the same older people, and they're going to retire soon, and we're really going to have a problem. Now, we've lost a lot of tech education in our schools over those years because when the school budgets got tighter, guess what went first? The tech program. So we have almost a decade of students that maybe weren't exposed to the trades as much as they were in the past. And when we hit that Great Recession the last time, a lot of the people that are in the construction industry, it's not always stable work. So they had to go get day jobs. I had these two really great Finnish carpenters. They actually lived in an apartment right across from our office building, and they both had to get manufacturing jobs. And they never came back into the industry. So how do you teach someone that's never mitered, a corner or installed a window? You can't just throw them on the job site and say, hey, go figure it out. That's institutional knowledge that gets passed down and passed down. And we lost a lot of that with the recession and, getting kids out of the industry. Average age of a construction worker has went up from $38,300 to $44,000, $44,900 actually in 2022. So we are seeing some wage growth there, but still, you look at what they get paid, and, I think the difficulty and the challenge of that work, it's not always alluring to kids to get in the trades. So we put an APB out for anyone that wants to get involved in the construction industry. We're looking for you right now. So let's talk about another kind of disparity. And you guys alluded to this. Kurt did kind of touch on it very briefly. This is the next challenge to housing affordability, and that's land availability. And there's something really crazy that happened. So in 2017, we permitted more new homes than the number of lots that we created. And this was the first time in over 12 years that happened in the metro Milwaukee area. Now, if you've ever done development, went through development process, typically it takes about 2 years, if you're lucky, to get everything through and get it to the point where you can actually start breaking ground on it. So we get back to that answer to the quiz, right? Speed. So what is this doing for us, the fact that we're not creating enough lots? Well, I just looked again in MLS in data. The average new lot right now in 2022 sold for nearly $200,000 for a vacant lot. Okay. And in 2020, it was $154,000. So it's up nearly 30% in just 2 years because we're not producing enough new lots and new land to make up for what we're building. And as Kurt again alluded to in his talk, in 2021, we built about 5,700 lots, but we permitted 11,700 homes. So building double the homes as amount of the lots that we've created. And the same thing in 2022, we built about 5,800 lots and permitted 11,300 homes. That's obviously not sustainable. Okay. And that's partly what's driving up the cost of these lots as well. I studied the 2000s to 2010 era, and the median lot price basically from that time period went up about $25,000, so about 35%. Then I looked at the next decade, 2010 to 2019. The median lot went up 17,000. So not quite so bad because that was as we're kind of coming out of the recession. But just in the last 3 years now, the median lot price went up $46,000, over 30%. We're not producing enough lots. Okay. And of course, I kind of alluded to this already, so I'm going to jump through it. We're working on these B and C sites, but we're applying these A site standards to these lots, and it's not fitting, it's not working, it's driving up the cost. So I kind of joke, but this is kind of what we're trying to build on right now. These wooded lots that are really, hilly, or we're building on lots with tons of wetlands and natural resources where you really can't build on that. All right, this one I'm going to go quick through. This is not maybe an issue we're going to solve today, but it is a challenge. Obviously, tariffs on housing. 2018 was a very difficult year for us with regards to that. We had the 20% lumber tariff on Canada. Somehow the prices went up 60%. I don't know, I'm not a mathematician, but there was definitely some other things going on there. It added about $9,000 to the cost of a new home. Then we had the 20% steel tariff. And then we had a 25% tariff on Chinese goods. And boy, I never realized, you think when you're building a home, there's not that much stuff from China on a home, but there certainly is. You got cabinets, wood floors, hardware, light fixtures, quartz countertops, appliances, all those kind of things. So that all added to our costs of homes. Actually, I'm going to give you one stat because I think this is interesting. So when we did the tariffs and they put them back to 20%, so Trump dropped them to 11%, and then we went up to 20%, it added another $7,000 to the cost of a new home. All right, the next challenge to housing affordability is the mentality or NIMBYism. This is a huge challenge that we're dealing with. Obviously, when you go to get a development approved, you're going to your village board or your town hall meetings, and you have to produce your subdivision. And of course, you send the letters out to all your neighbors, and they get to come and yell at you for the next 3 hours. That's at least what happened to me. So I'm used to being the bad guy, but you hear all these things. You're going to cause light pollution and noise pollution and all these things. Now, we did create the Developer Bill of Rights, and that bill, actually, I got to use it when I was doing my last development. And while that worked and created some certainty, it basically said that you have to, as a person that's complaining about the subdivision, you have to be able to provide factual basis for why this shouldn't happen. But at the same time, that also puts the burden back on the developer that I also have to provide facts. So I had to get traffic studies, and I had to do all these things. I had to bring an appraiser in and all these things to refute all the statements that these neighbors were making. And the funny thing is, the subdivision that I was doing, I was looking to reduce the square footage. This is a brand new subdivision by 100 square feet. And you would have thought that I was, drowning babies or something. That's how vehemently they were opposed to this, over 100 square feet. But I actually showed them the cost of these new homes was going to be well over $100,000 more than anything that had sold in their subdivision. But, that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with. So we got to get away from not in my backyard and get into yes in my backyard. I'm going to pick on the city of Waukesha for this one. This is another kind of thing that's happened. Now, we should be happy, right? They've got this really nice apartment project. It says, what's happening on the corner of White Rock and Moreland? A new affordable housing development called Frame Park Commons is coming. This development will consist of 2 apartment buildings featuring different style apartments. Apartments are not affordable housing. Apartments are rentals. So I took an issue with this because I even contacted him and said, you're wrong here. That's a rental unit. That's not affordable housing. Affordable housing is something that someone would own. So it's just kind of, again, sometimes we got to watch the wording of what we're saying out there because it does make a difference. Another problem, I don't think we're going to solve this one today, but buyer preferences is another challenge, right? We've got all these TV shows, we've got Instagram, we've got TikTok, all these things that people are showing, Pinterest and House, showing all these things, and everybody wants, the next Instagram worthy house, and they want to one up everybody else and show off. And, you show these shows too, and they're like, hey, we're going to rebuild this whole house in 24 hours for, under $10,000 or whatever. And we know that that's just not even feasible, right? Some of these shows, they don't include the labor, they get discounted materials, and they're just showing, the donated material cost, but it creates this false expectation among home buyers. Now, what's this, you ask? Anyone have a guess what this is? Planned unit development. Okay. You're close. So this could either be the development process or this could be the permit process for a new home. Either way, it's really complex. Okay. So that's the next challenge that we're dealing with, complexity of process. There are so many things that you have to do, and there's no uniformity whatsoever in the development process. If I'm going to develop in Village of Waukesha, where I do a lot of stuff, or I'm developing even just in the city of Waukesha, which is not very far away, it's a completely different process. And I develop in Muskego or West Bend or wherever, everybody's got a completely different process. You have to relearn and figure everything out every single time. And heaven forbid the board changes or the rules change, or how many times have the staff changed at a local level. You have a different engineer, a different attorney, and they go and change the whole process again. So you could even redevelop in the same area 2 years later, and you've got a completely different set of processes to follow. This is why it takes so darn long to create a subdivision. And then the building permits, it's the same thing. It's typically 120 to 140 days to go through the entire permit process to get a home. With all the documentation you have to get, the wall bracing, the heat calcs, and the engineering, and now you got to get a zoning permit, and all these things, it just takes forever and ever. And as we've seen, like last couple of years with all the challenges in the pricing and the lumber costs, when you take 3 months, trying to figure out a price on a home over 3 months when the lumber prices are just shooting up and down every single day, it's a real challenge. This slide here, trying not to be political, but just talking about the pandemic fueled inflation. This was just a good slide to show. Obviously, 6.5% inflation rate recently. Gas prices, in the 2s, now up to the mid 3s, kind of back down a little bit now. The fixed rate mortgage, we were at that 2.65, those golden handcuffs that we talked about. Now we're in the 6% range plus for a 30-year fixed mortgage. Fuel costs went up from 16.5% to 41.5%. Prices at the grocery store, 3.7% increase now to 11.8%. Even the cost of electricity is almost up 14.3%. And earnings on average have decreased. So our consumers are now even more financially pinched than they were before. And especially when we talk about that millennial buyer, how are they going to be able to afford a down payment on a home when they see all their costs rise this quickly? The next challenge, you may have seen this. I'm fairly outspoken on LinkedIn. I've posted this picture. It went viral all over the internet. This was when lumber was crazy, but we have all the supply chain issues that were going on, still kind of persist to this day. People weren't getting it. There was nothing happening on it. And I said, I'm going to try and relate this to something that people can understand. So I went to my lumber yard and said, I want $1,000 worth of lumber in today's cost. And then I went back and calculated pre-pandemic what $1,000 worth of lumber would have got you. And I said, I want to put them side by side. I had no clue what this was going to look like. I just was like, I think this is going to be interesting from a visual. So that's what it was. And that is how stark a difference that was. So this was back in, if we go back into February of 2021, that was probably the absolute peak of lumber. I had a little house that we built before. It was a 1,900 square foot house, so nothing major. And I paid $115,000 for the lumber package on it. And I had a bigger house in 2020 that I built that was like 4,000 square feet, and we paid $50,000 for that lumber. So here I was in Savannah, Georgia. This is like, I think the second largest port. And it was funny because we're sitting on the side of the road, or not the road, but the street here. They have the street walk. And all of a sudden a ship came in with all these containers. Everybody starts clapping and cheering because we're actually getting ships back in to the country. There were 70 ships sitting in the ocean that couldn't get in. So this was, again, the 2021 timeframe. And, obviously trying to get things open, get the shipping, get the products back in. So I was really happy to see. I was hoping there was lumber on that ship. But we still have supply chain issues to this day. Windows, it's still hard to get windows for homes. You have time. Obviously, interest rates, we've talked about that, huge spike in that as well. And then we have some new challenges ahead. I'm going to go really fast now, but I want to say housing pays for itself. And this is really one of the things we got to take back to our municipalities. When you create 1,000 homes, that creates $298 million in income. And that creates $56 million in taxes and revenue to your state and local government. So what is $56 million? What would that buy you? Well, you could buy this private island here, Darby Island, here in the Bahamas and the Caribbean for $46 million. And you still have, $8 to $10 million to improve it. So that's how much money 1,000 houses can generate for your municipality. And the thing is with houses is that they pay for themselves afterwards too. So 15 years later, the NAHB did a study. They generated $351 million in revenue as opposed to $223 million in costs. So still a net positive there. All right. going to go quick to the solutions, and then we'll turn it over to you guys. One of the big solutions, as I mentioned earlier, density. This is Houston. I visited this. This was a more affordable housing community. They do it very different. They do the opposite. So they do, instead of minimum lot sizes, they do maximum lot sizes, 45 foot, 55 foot, 65 foot wide lots. That's all you can have. Now, I wouldn't say that I would necessarily want to live in this or necessarily build it. But here you can see these houses are 5 feet apart. They're 3 and 4 stories. But again, density. Showing tighter setbacks, shorter houses up the front. Again, this is in Houston. So we got to reimagine our development standards. We've got to create more certainty in our development process, moving along faster. We've got to get private industry and government working together. This is a big solution that I'd like to throw out to the panel. Taxes and tax burdens on vacant lots. Part of the reason I don't develop a lot of lots anymore, I develop them in smaller chunks because I don't want to get stuck holding the property tax on these lots for 3 and 4 years at $2,000 a lot. So I limit the number of lots that I create. If there's a way to reduce or suspend some of the taxes on these vacant lots until we get an occupancy permit, I think that's something we need to talk about, because then I would create more lots and that would also drive down my cost. The other thing that I want to just briefly mention, obviously cap and code limit or limits on code changes. Don't take the government cheese as it is. And what I mean by that is right now in the infrastructure bill, the federal government is incentivizing local municipalities to do stretch codes and expand their codes. But I'm saying right now, if you're a municipal person, don't take the government cheese. Don't take that government money, because all you're doing is, again, driving up the cost of housing even further. And then the last thing, don't pander to climate change or fear mongering. That's where a lot of this stuff is coming from. They're trying to ban gas stoves, trying to get rid of, gas in homes, and they're trying to go with electrification, which we don't even have the power on the grid to handle that as well. And then deregulate. We got to drastically reduce regulations. It's like an onion. It just gets more and more layers. We got to peel back those layers and start to reduce it and simplify that process. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with as an example, I was talking with Carl Harris, who is going to be the chairman of NHB next year. He's in Wichita, Kansas. And we had a conversation. What's the average lot price in your area? And I said, well, it's $200,000. He goes, ours is $50,000. And then we had this whole conversation about the development process. And the long and short of it is, this is another idea to drive down cost. What he had suggested was, in his area, the municipality actually will pay for the cost of the development. And then when the lot is built on, then the developer would then pay back the government for that portion of the development cost. Instead, what we have right now is, I as a developer have to buy the land. I then have to pay for all the infrastructure. I then have to bond all the costs of the infrastructure plus 20%. So now I'm basically shelling out all this money, and then all the way as I'm developing the subdivision, the municipality is telling me they don't like this, they want me to do this, and it's all adding cost. And then if something breaks or gets damaged, they make me fix it right away. Then when I'm all done with it, they make me fix it again until they like it. And then they say, okay, thank you. We're going to take your road that you paid for, and you're still on the hook for it for 2 more years. So all we've done is put the entire burden of the development on the developer. And it's just increased the cost, and it's taken a lot of people out of the market. We've got to make it more accessible for people to develop land. So that's it.
Wow. Okay. Again, the purpose here today is to talk about, in this session, is to talk about whether or not we can do things related to the building of homes, etc. Right? And I'd like to start with Gordon and Mike around the labor issue in terms of what you're seeing out there. So a few years ago, there was an article that ran on a national study on carpenters, for example. It said 94% of the people trying to hire carpenters were having difficulty finding people. I'm assuming that's not gotten any better based upon the aging factors and all the rest of it. But I wonder if you could give us some sense of how that's working for you as a developer, Mike, and Gordon, what you're seeing in terms of the apprenticeship programs, et cetera. But Mike, why don't you kick it off for us.
Thank you. And it's interesting sitting here listening to everybody talk and how I can relate to every aspect of everything that's been said. Right now, I'm fortunate that last night, somebody's coming for an interview tomorrow. I don't get that very often anymore. And he might even be qualified because he's got some skill set. So I've seen a massive change in labor through the years, and I got to thinking, how can I help or fix it? So I went to the local high school and said, do you mind if I come up and teach classes? I mean, I got to get in front of these kids at a young age. So I said, I'm going to go up and teach. So I went to the shop class the first time, and they allowed me to teach these kids and interact with them. And what that did for me as an owner is I got to screen the entire room and see which ones were paying attention. And then I can start focusing in and doing that. And then my daughter asked if I could come up and teach a sociology class. And I said, sure, but I don't know what that is. I mean, if I can get in front of these kids, I'm going to go do it. So I went up and I read the 5 chapters that they were working on and had class. And that was the most engaging group of kids I've seen, which told me there's so much potential in front of me. And I said, just because I'm a builder doesn't mean that you're going to have a job with me. But a lot of us builders, developers, we own 6 different businesses in Manitowoc. So I can say, you may not work directly for me in the construction company, but I have opportunities a lot of different places and I can cross train. So right now, what I'm doing at the high school is I'm spearheading a program that we're going to start a technical high school in 9th grade. The Fond du Lac has one, and we got to tour that last week. I was out of town, but they're very good. So they started with 35 kids. They're running at 190 to 195 kids now. Successful program. Manitowoc is a production industry type of market yet, so it's not a lot of Silicon Valley style stuff. So I'm watching firsthand. I have 4 kids at home. My 2 daughters' boyfriends come over for dinner, and I just look at this talent pool that I have in front of me and realize that these kids ain't going to college. Not one of them. None of my kids have any interest in college. They all want to work for dad or do something in the trades or the business. And so we're working on creating a program up at the high school that will allow these kids to start. And the first year in 9th grade, they will get their hands dirty, but they'll have classes. Still got to take the core classes. By the second year, they're learning a skill set and a trade. And what we're trying to do is cross-train them from, it could be carpentry, it could be a diesel mechanic, robotics, and train them. By year 3, they're in a youth apprenticeship program. And by year 4, they have found out where they might want to go. And the beauty is we pay for all the schooling as employers. We will pay. And I have so many industries that have, after I've given this speech, they come up to me and say, how can we help? What do we need to do? So it's been super good. Sitting at the graduation for my daughter last year, they said they had 178 kids graduate from the YA program. What I heard is there's 178 kids that are staying in the city of Manitowoc. That's how you retain. And they had opportunity. All their stuff is paid for. They're right into the workforce and they're living here. Manitowoc is leading the charge in the state with close to 400 youth apprenticeships in Manitowoc County now.
Gordon, you obviously, I'm interested, we talked earlier in the first panel about the importance of public-private sector collaborations. There's an important collaboration available between labor and employers in this process as well. And I'm interested in, where you folks in labor community in North America, how you feel about the pre-apprenticeship approach and the kind of things Mike's talking about.
Yeah, so for us, it's the key. It's essential. We feel like we need to do a better job of telling our story and making sure those opportunities are out there. When we say apprenticeship, we feel like we're always talking about the trades, but if you look at industries across the country that are also facing a shortage of people, you're seeing apprenticeships being developed for other careers, biomedical, other things where they realize that that's the gateway to get people involved in a career, makes it more likely that they'll stay, makes it less likely that there'll be turnover. And so for us, it's encouraging our contractors to, participate in the apprenticeship program so they recognize, hey, this is how we're going to pull people in And then obviously, especially for high school graduates, but not just high school graduates, letting them know about the apprenticeship program that we have, what it will take for them to get into a good paying, fulfilling career. And we hit as many career fairs, going to the Tech Ed Instructors Conference, next week. But we hear a lot of stories like you just mentioned in Manitowoc, where success breeds success. You get one generation of kids that get through and their siblings also want to do. And so those kind of, you see certain communities almost excelling and doing better at developing apprenticeships because they're getting that notoriety for it. But I mean, we face a people shortage, right? I mean, every industry is going to be competing for people. We feel like we've got a story to tell that not every kid is going to be a college-bound student, but if you like to be outside, you like to work with your hands, you're a creative type, there's a pathway for you starting at the youth apprenticeship level, but certainly at the apprenticeship level where, it's always hard because for whatever reason, today's kids aren't as excited about pension and benefits at age 20 as perhaps people were 30 years ago. But it's incredible, the career path and the earnings that you can have at such a young age, comparable to some of your peers that may be going to college or choosing a different field. So we feel like there's opportunity there, and it really is a partnership between our contractors and the laborers in terms of we're all looking for the same thing. So however we can partner to do that is how we're going to do it. But I think more and more employers need to recognize because some buy into the apprenticeship program more than others. And everybody is highlighting the fact that we have a shortage of skilled workers. The best thing that they can do is to take apprentices, even though it may disrupt a little bit of how they've done things, because that's what's going to pull people in. And so we've been spending a lot of my time really sort of encouraging that if everybody is concerned about the future of skilled workforce and where we're going to get people, voting the apprenticeship, participating, sponsoring, it's going to be how it's done. Because when we have people go through the apprenticeship program with the laborers, it's 400 hours of classroom training, 4,000 hours of on-the-job training, 2 to 3 years, can move faster or slower. I'm going to say, they get done and they have to find a contractor that's willing to do it. And so we're really trying to connect those that are participating in the program and then employers who are looking for someone. So that's been a lot of my job right now, is to try to sell apprenticeship as the key to getting our workforce that we need.
And Pete, let me turn to you now in terms of where the technical college campuses are playing a role. And I know you've got some specifically relevant.
We've got some things going on, but when David was speaking, I thought of just a real life example of the housing costs. So in 1992, my wife and I bought a house for $92,000 here in West Bend, 1,250 square foot house. The two of us combined were probably making $50,000 a year. Okay. This past weekend, I spent my weekend up north in our beautiful Northwoods snowmobiling with my neighbor who's been building houses his entire life. His father built houses. He told me to build a 2,000 square foot house now with a $100,000 lot, $600,000 for the house. So 700 grand. So if you do some cross multiplication here, you to be at the same thing my wife and I were at would be $380,000 a year income. If you just look at 92 from now and what's happened with that. So that was just startling when I did the math in my head here. Regarding the tech colleges, I can tell you is that people are inspired by their teachers. And I can tell you at West Bend High School right now, West Bend High School has got an advanced carpentry class that uses our space here. We've got what we call our building in a building back on the back part of campus, and they're using that space. Last year they had about 15 students in an advanced carpentry class. This year they've got 2 sections of about 20 students each, and they combine it with Kewaskum High School, so it's a West Bend Kewaskum. So that's and I can tell you, Rob Wilmus, the instructor from West Bend High School, has inspired these students, and And we give them the space for free. They come up here. It's a win-win for us. They see what we have to offer in other trades and things like that. So that's some positive news. But once again, it's driven by the high school faculty. At Moraine Park, probably about 10 years ago, we had a building trades construction worker program that we finally had to close when we were down to only 5 students. We couldn't afford to keep the program going anymore. And since then, we've moved away. We have apprentices coming here to college right now that they were here last week. About 30 of them come here a few weeks a year, lots during the winter when there's less stuff going on. So they're all employed coming here. I've been told that after the first of the year, it's up to 50 people are going to be coming. So that's some positive things that's happening. And I can say I work with the Washington County high schools quite a bit. So Slinger, Kewaskum, West Bend, Hartford. And I think the trades are cool again. Honestly, it's coming back. People are realizing how much money they can make in the trades. And I think it's changed quite a bit.
So let me, as I go to Josh and Adam, and I'm going to paraphrase part of what I've heard and part of what I know, okay? You guys are now in the business of trying to get this problem solved in your communities. You have a plan, you have steps forward you want to take, and the clock is ticking here, okay? And what I hear is there's good stuff going on. The market is changing in the area in terms of where the schools are, in terms of where the interest is, in terms of perhaps where some of the wages are. And I think that's all great. I'm not sure it's sufficient in terms of the work that needs to get done to accomplish Josh's program. And I'd like you to comment on that. I'm not sure that it can get done in the time frame that Kurt and others suggest we need to be addressing in order to stay ahead of the competition. In Washington County is one county. There are what, 3,500 counties in the United States of America? 3,069 counties, okay? Part of what's happened with the ARPA money is you create a concentration of capital. So in addition to the other 71 counties in the state of Wisconsin who want to build houses, you got whatever it's 2,990, whatever it is, who are spending similar kinds of money. So we are competing for that workforce. We don't have enough here. We're going to have to be bringing people in. So there's a competition going on. In that context, I'd ask Josh to tell us how, what do you think the odds are here? And given the fact that you're trying to manage money and everything else, when we talk about solutions, I guess what I'm asking you to do is tell me, how important is the timeline to being able to produce the contractors that you need in order to make the plan work in that 3-year program you've laid out?
So when I started doing my research on this issue and holistically really thinking past just housing and more, as I talked about earlier, our great community concept. There's a paper that was written maybe in 2020 or so called The Demographic Drought. And it was produced by MZ. And it's really just statistical analysis. And it's a lot of what we just heard from this panel and we've heard earlier. Basically, the United States over the next 30 years is going to start depopulating. Baby boomers are beginning with the Great Recession, beginning with COVID in particular, but even leading up to that, started retiring at a clip of 3 million per year, which how many of you remember the term silver tsunami? It was like a decade ago we were talking about that. Well, the Great Recession kicked it back farther, but it's here. We're in the middle of the silver tsunami. So 3 million a year for every year from now for the next decade or so. So what we're really talking about, what as Gordon was highlighting, is an issue in this industry and every industry. If we had registered nurses sitting in the room right now, you'd hear almost exactly the same story. And you could go industry by industry by industry, and it would be over and over and over again. We don't have the people. So my takeaway, now here, that's the bad news. The good news is there's only one country worse off than us, and it's China. Now we can learn lessons from countries that have gone through this or are going through this ahead of us. Japan is one really good example. And you see the massive cultural changes that are happening in Japan today. And how do we react? They're about 7 or 8 years ahead of us. How do we react learning from what they had? Well, I think it comes down to really 3 things. So you talk about ARPA, you talk about capital. Prior to the Great Recession, you had banks that were providing capital and equity to developers on the front end, taking care of a lot of the things that you just heard of. The Wichita example is really interesting. We'll be looking at that, but they're not doing that anymore. You go back to the 1950s, FHA was providing loans to builders and developers at that time. They're not doing that anymore. So it's not as if we haven't solved this type of an issue in the past. We have all the solutions are in the history books. All you got to do is go and find them and apply them to today's principles. Where it comes with, whether it's ARPA dollars or other dollars that local governments have at their disposal, I think we were talking about TIF districts having some surpluses earlier. The dollars source doesn't matter so much. It's where are you going to apply it? Now, when you look across those other 3,000 counties, housing's not the only problem we've got. And it gets more complicated because I talked in the previous session about the whole housing continuum. So Winnebago County is focusing heavily on homelessness and transitional housing, which Gordon could probably speak to better than I can. But it's a different niche, it's a different problem, but it's all part of the housing continuum. What we're trying to address specifically is the missing middle, so to speak, or what I call next generation housing. The reason I utilize that term is because when you think in terms of the Sansdemic, our problem is less about housing and it's more about the next generation. What this is going to boil down to, and a gentleman from Manitowoc said it a few minutes ago at Mike, I think what it's going to boil down to is retain. The municipality, the county, the state, fill in the blank, who can figure out how do we keep our kids, wins the prosperity game for the next 50 years. This isn't about 1% community growth, population growth. It's certainly not about 5% population growth. And people in Washington County and Waukesha County would lose their minds if it was about that. But this is simply about how do we get our kids to come home. And we couldn't have planned the seeding better, because when we were starting this process, I used Pete's son Jack as an example. So Pete's son Jack is mid-20s. He and his wife had lots of options. Graduated from Marquette with a law degree. Super smart kid. Interned for Washington County a couple different times. When you've got any kid, whether it's in the trades or whether it's in with a law degree or a bachelor's degree, they've got options coming up the wazoo right now. And everybody needs people. The most influential people in their life are their parents' friends, that teacher, somebody somehow they know. The goal of our great community and next generation housing is not housing. It's the next generation. And how do we convince even half of those kids to come home? I can tell you in this county, and I used to be the president of the Hartford Union High School board, we are very bad. We do not do a good job at all of keeping our kids. We're lucky if we retain 25% on the front end. And eventually, by the time they're having kids, we get close to 50. We think, which means we don't really know because we don't measure it. Well, that which gets measured gets done. So I think we need to really start focusing on how do we get those kids back? Where in the housing continuum do each one of these municipalities look to? And when I say the state and federal government can incentivize the types of things that we were talking about earlier, that's what I'm talking about. There's a place for their housing vouchers. There's a place for affordable housing, as David said earlier. There's a place for homelessness. But if you don't figure out the missing middle, you're talking middle income America. It's the heart and soul of our country. If we cannot figure out how to get them into home ownership, we cited some of the statistics before. I don't remember whose slide it was. I think it was Kurt's. African American community home ownership is abysmal, and shame on all of us. Shame on our country for getting us into this situation. And by the way, we did it, and so did our zoning codes. How do we resolve that? We can do a lot of the programs we did post-World War II America are absolutely brilliant, and we can replicate them, whether they were at the federal level, the state level, or I hate to break it to you, how do you think Kohler was built? And I don't mean Kohler Company, although certainly Kohler Company, but the community of Kohler, West Bend, the south side of West Bend. Some of you may still remember the West Bend Company, the old mixers and coffee bean pots. Those industries built housing in the 50s. We don't do that anymore. Not only do not do it, we don't allow for it. So I really believe at the end of the day, it's a matter of priorities. Where are we going to put our dollars? And to me, the missing middle is not just the middle stream starter home. It's also middle income people. We got to get our kids to come back and live here. And the communities and the counties that can figure out how to do that are going to win the prosperity game for the next generation, the next century.
So before I let Adam jump in, let me push back just a little bit, Josh, because I applaud the passion. I agree with the analysis. I remain concerned about how quickly we can get it done, given the status of the cost system complex at the moment and the availability of the labor force. And so I guess what I'd ask you to do is to comment on that. And then I'm going to come back and ask Mike and David to talk about, the premise, I think, is that you put together in Washington County a comprehensive, pretty well thought out package of things. And the question for the developers is that attractive enough? Does that work for you? If you can deliver on your end, does that make you a priority for them to come and decide that's where I want to build, that's where I want to work, because I can get it done faster, I can get it done more reasonably, and yada, yada. And so that's the part of the question, I think. So Adam, why don't you jump in and then we'll open it up for that kind of conversation.
All right. I guess something maybe pivoting a little bit, because again, Manitowoc is maybe a little bit different, is historically what we've been trying to do is create the housing demand, or at least the appearance of housing demand. We know we have housing demand. We completed the housing study. We need it all across the board, as been discussed. We need workforce housing. We need high-end housing. We need middle housing. We need all of it. We know that, but how do we get the builder to look at us instead of an Appleton or a Green Bay or something like that? So what at least Manitowoc has been doing is we've been saying a priority is make ourselves a more livable community. So that's looking at, maybe it's not investing in housing directly, but we're investing in the downtown area. So things like facade programs, beautification, working to get local businesses opening that offer 24/7 activity downtown. Taking on a 20-acre brownfield that's immediately adjacent to the downtown area, putting in millions and millions of dollars of infrastructure in the hopes that we can get more residential downtown, which then in turn builds businesses downtown. So again, it's looking at housing, but it's not looking at housing, because for us, we have to be creative, because otherwise we're going to have our young people who are growing up, they're graduating, and they're going to go to a Milwaukee, they're going to go to a Madison, and we're never going to get them back, because they're going to say, well, I can do all of these things there, and then what does Manitowoc have to offer? I guess I'll make it short and sweet, and that's kind of what we're looking at.
That's fine. So Josh, I'll give you another chance to just chime in, and then we'll go to David, and then we'll go to Mike.
Sure. So I think everything that I just described is completely able to be replicated. And both with ARPA dollars, plenty of municipalities and counties in particular are in the best financial position they've been in a long time. And the state certainly is in the best position it's been in a long time. I don't believe capital or equity is really the problem. I think priorities are the problem. And so I'll disagree with Adam and maybe set some sparks off a little bit. I believe if the carousel of prosperity is right and true, and I certainly believe it is, our industrial base is where we've got to start. The trades is where we've got to start. Those businesses that create family sustaining jobs. While it's nice to have a brand new Target or an Olive Garden or the fancy stuff downtown, they do not create family sustaining jobs. They're an outcome. We're not talking about outputs. We're talking about outcomes. When there's enough prosperity in the community, those things begin to happen on their own. So I think it's a matter of where you put your dollars. If you're saying to industry, it doesn't matter what industry. If you're saying to industry, we're going to invest in your best resource, and that's people. We're going to invest in housing so they can actually get here. And I think actually Manitowoc has a distinct advantage. I'm a graduate of Manitowoc Lutheran High School. A few years later, the mayor graduated from there, and a few years before me, the city administrator in West Bend graduated from there. So I know that community well. Their advantage is it's a hell of a lot cheaper to do everything up there. A lot cheaper. I'd be leveraging that advantage like crazy, and I'd be trying to find ways to add more industry, more industry, more industry. So I think I've always believed firmly that if that carousel prosperity is true and real, you've got to be investing in businesses with family sustaining jobs and in community, which in this case is housing, because it's a hurdle for everyone. So I firmly believe it's a matter of where does this legislature decide that they're going to put their money? Where does your local community decide it's going to put its money? And when you follow the money, you'll find out where the community's priorities are. And whether it's ARPA money or whether it's TIF money or whether it's general fund balance money, it doesn't matter. Money is dictated, priorities are dictated by where you put your money. And that's just how budgets work.
So David, did I good enough plan?
Sure. I'm gonna jump back to the labor and the student thing really quickly, and then we can talk about the development piece a little bit more. But one of the things we need to do with kids is we got to start earlier. So we are going into high schools, and that's great. I do that as well, and I talk to high school students, but they've already been kind of indoctrinated and have their mind made up a lot of times at that point. We've got to start them maybe even as they're finishing grade school and going into middle school, and showing them the benefits and the cool things that we do in the trades. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is we also need to look at creating a simpler process for kids to get apprenticeships, because right now there's really no set system or process. The trades are a very like nomadic kind of group where they're just kind of off on their own. They don't really they know how to make something, but they don't really know how to talk to kids and bring them into the industry. So we've got to find a way to link that up better and make it an easier process for kids to be aware of apprenticeships and then connect them into those. So, and then the last thing is we got to really restore the pride back into, I did this, I made this myself, I created this. Right now, we're rewarding people for making a really great Instagram post by, they get all these likes and this awareness. But like, we got to get back to that. Hey, you made the bird feeder, you made the little cabinet in class, and look at how cool that was. I think we've got to get that mentality of I made it myself back into the schools. And then the other thing is stop incentivizing the schools, because right now schools are incentivized by how many kids you graduate and how many of them go on to college. We have to redefine success, and success is, getting in a career and getting, stable income and getting that job. And how cool is it that you could go right from high school and start making $40,000, $50,000 a year, and 2-3 years later, you bought your own house and you own your own vehicle. That's the American dream too. Why have we gotten away from that?
Let me push again. The challenge I'm having is that all the demographic analysis tells us we do not have the bodies we need in this state to do fill in the blank, okay? Whether you're doing broadband or you're doing housing, you're doing energy construction, you're doing bridges, we do not have the bodies here, not enough. We are going to have to recruit people into the state to be able to do that. In the short run, developers will go, I think, buy into this whole concept of workforce housing. And I think that you have the sense that there's an interest in the public sector, unlike I've seen any time in the last 15 years or so, to come to the table and say, how do we do this? And I think Josh has done a nice job, and I think Adam's working on the same set of problems. My question continues to be, let's assume it all works. Let's assume the apprenticeship drive. Let's assume we can change the mindset in terms of what kids are doing and all the rest of that. What happens in the next 12 months, next 24 months, next 36 months? The question is, as a developer, Mike, and David, is where Josh is going good enough to attract what you've got at the moment, because you might be able to move on it quickly? And what does that mean next year? Are we going to be, what are we doing to bring people in next year?
So David hit on it early, regulations, streamlining stuff. If it takes 2 years to do this, to put a subdivision in, I mean, in the risk versus reward, it's not worth it. Why would I do that? So, working with Adam at the city, I sat on city council for 7 years as well, so I understand it. And, I helped try to create some new programs to do this. So I'm building my first subdivision that Adam spoke of earlier, and it's scary. I mean, it's a risk, especially when one hasn't been built since 2012. And I thought it was going to be, get it done in 6 months. I'm at a year right now, and we're just about to break ground. And that is tough. And at the end of the day, everything I did, I believe could have been done in 3 months. I mean, it just took that much longer. So regulations on everything, again, drives the cost up on all of it. So now I have a year of carrying costs on this stuff before I even get started. And I'm only doing 33 homes in the next few years. That's not touching the problem. So now I know I got to start looking for land for 2 years out to find that. And then I wrote down, if we can have the entire state, and I think Brad spoke on it earlier, is a simple plan format building permit process that I can just take and drop it off and it's done. This is going to streamline and we're going to get production up dramatically. We are definitely in a crossroads, and the construction, there's a lot of that's a dying breed. We don't have masons anymore. You can't find anybody to lay brick. So we're coming up with new products and stuff to have to change that. So I think everybody in this room probably grew up in a 1-story house with a 2-car detached garage. There's nothing wrong with that. So you got to get past this Midwest mentality, I call it, is you have to have a basement. No, you don't. You have to have this all these fancy stuff. You don't need it. I mean, every one of our parents, and our parents still live there. I'm not sure who said that. They still live in them homes. There's nothing wrong with them homes. So if we can get back to building that stuff, so my subdivision will be 1,600 to 2,200 square foot homes with no basements. It's a planned unit development that Adam and I have been working on. So the roads are 26 feet wide. There's no sidewalks. And I'm putting all the infrastructure in myself because I tried to remove the city from my problem, because it would have cost me another $500,000 of infrastructure. And I would have got half the amount of lots into that 7 acres. So, I mean, the city of Manitowoc is working very hard with people to create a better outcome.
Gordon, you want to jump in here in terms of what you're seeing in terms of numbers in our state here?
Yeah, I mean, and I understand the question that you're asking, and I think right now with where the economy is, with where commercial development is, with where infrastructure projects are, with ARPA is there's more work than there are bodies to do that work, and I don't think it will get done on the timeline, and I'm not going to be able to speak to where housing ranks on those things. But, inflation is a global issue right now, but it's hard to imagine with the shortage we have, there not being some labor inflation involved as well over the next few years, given that we know we need people to do this kind of work, probably going to have to pay more, to do it. So, those are the kind of things that used to keep me up as a legislator. I sleep great now. No, just kidding. I work, but I mean, the people shortage is very real. I know we're not in the 3-year window we're talking about, but maybe in the 10-year window, things like immigration are going to become a bigger issue. I had 3 guys came to bring a dryer to my house the other day. I'm pretty sure none of them were citizens. Only one spoke English. One of the people was probably like 14. And I thought, this is tough. But then I also thought, we need you more. And I think given the upper Midwest and the Northeast and a lot of states that are depopulating, maybe that'll become more of the national conversation.
And Pete, let me ask you to chime in from a technical college point of view. What are we doing in terms of the technical colleges looking at the question of recruiting students from outside the state?
Well, from outside the state? Not a lot from outside the state.
Okay.
There's only a few technical colleges in the state that have housing. I mean, it's happening more and more often now. Western has some, Madison. Actually, Moraine Park partners with a couple other schools up in Fond du Lac for some housing, but bring people in from out of the state, you're going to have housing. And our traditional students are living in our district and usually working in our district already too. So, but it's tough because you look at high school graduation rates, less and less students every year. They talk about the 2025 cliff, the students that are going to be freshmen in college in 2025. So if it's bad now, it's going to get worse in the next couple of years. So I'm thinking, that to stop the bleeding a little bit is maybe to focus on what Josh talked about is, once again, how do you keep those students here in Washington County after they do graduate and are, at that age where they can start a life. So at least if you can retain them, then you stop the bleeding a little bit.
Josh, go ahead.
I obviously agree. It's what next generation housing is about, but you're asking a question about a much broader issue than just housing. And it probably isn't going to surprise anyone in this room. In the most conservative county in the state of Wisconsin, you have one of the most conservative county executives in the state of Wisconsin. I firmly believe in Reaganomics. I believe supply side economics. I think there are very few places in America right now where young people can actually afford to come and live. So we're spending all of our time talking about housing. And at the beginning, it was touched on, but we haven't talked about it since. The cost of childcare is astronomical. The cost of transportation is astronomical. The cost of healthcare is astronomical. The cost of student loans is astronomical. You want to know why millennials stayed in downtown areas or maybe mom and dad's basement? It wasn't because that's really what we wanted. And I'm the oldest of millennials. I'll break a little secret to you. We're the same as every generation before us. We haven't had the opportunity to come out for the most part. We were stuck in every way you can think of. I mean, think of what student loans have done to us. Think about what the Great Recession has done to us. Think about what the cost of childcare. I mean, if you're a 35-year-old female who's midway up the career ladder and you're thinking about having a child, you literally have to do the math on what it's going to cost you before you have that baby. So how do we solve the problem? We got to get a hell of a lot more competitive. We're not the tax hell we once was, but we're more like we're the middle of the road now. I'll put it nicely. We have plenty of room to improve. If we create space where you can get a house for below $250 in Manitowoc, I mean, you start advertising that in Chicago where people are leaving in droves. And by the way, you can kind of work anywhere right now. If you're a college graduate and you want to work from home, and I've got plenty of them who work for the county who are constantly asking me to work from home, we have built-in advantages everywhere in the state of Wisconsin. So when I said earlier, it's a matter of priorities, that's what I mean. What's more important to the state of Wisconsin? Is it housing? Is it broadband? Is it helping with childcare? Is it transportation? You got to start somewhere. All I'm saying is none of the rest of that stuff even matters. That 35-year-old female who's thinking about having a baby, if she doesn't have a place to live in my community, she's not even thinking about my place. And she's not thinking about it's $280 a month to pay for one child to be at the YMCA every week. My student loan payment is $350 a month. Well, I'll do the math later when we get to the end, but that's what I mean. This is a big issue. And I think if you start with supply side economics and you hit housing, which is the number one hurdle, and then you talk about family sustaining jobs, whether that's vis-a-vis broadband, whether it's vis-a-vis actually creating industrial parks that work, I think that you're hitting the nail on the head. And then every Jack Rettler that comes back is going to bring one or two graduates from DePaul and Wichita State who are going, wait a minute, it's really affordable to live in Sheboygan or Manitowoc or West Bend or Eau Claire, and I can commute to Minneapolis when I have to, right? My wife, I live in just outside of West Bend. My wife commutes to Chicago every so often. So I think it's all about supply side economics. If we can figure that out and figure out both regulatory and tax reform in the state of Wisconsin, I mean, we are in a position right now where we could be cooking with oil. I mean, we are positioned to be able to achieve this. It's a matter of what our priorities are.
David, I'm going to let you wrap up this moment, and then I'm going to see if we have questions
Okay.
from the audience.
Yeah, I wanted to jump back to something Mike had said earlier, just with regard to development. Two things. So one is if you're trying to incentivize, get more developers in the area, I mean, well, the first thing a developer is going to look at is risk versus reward, right? So if you can find a way to mitigate some of the risk and still keep what of the reward, you're going to get developers to come into the area. So as I was mentioning earlier, like when you make it so difficult for a developer to even do a project in your area, you basically, they're going to do it somewhere. They're just going to go find somewhere else to do it if you're going to be too difficult. And I've literally done that. I've had that conversation with the municipality and said, I'm going here first because you guys are too hard to work with. And so one of the other things that we need to do is restore some of the trust and the power back to the people in that, like look at development, for example. I have to hire a private engineering firm to design my subdivision. Okay. Then the municipality, I have to pay the municipality to hire their engineering firm and look at everything else my engineer that gets a stamp and gets to approve all this stuff did and say, I don't like this, I don't like that, and then redo it. That's incredibly expensive. It's incredibly wasteful and time consuming on top of it. So we've got to look at things like that and say, if we've got a professional engineer that got their certification in this, why are we allowing another one to come in and tear it all apart and start all over again? It's so demoralizing when you go through development and have to deal with that.
And to David's point, this is a great example. When from the municipal side of the coin, and plan commissions in particular, city councils, we look at that and go, well, we're trying to protect the end user and we're trying to protect the community. This is why you have to have administrators and planners sitting at the table at the beginning, because the more collaboration there is, when we're charging those double costs, and then you kind of show that to that plan commission or city council, I think you can start to bring those barriers down. But we're looking at it from two completely different lenses. We need to start looking through the same lens at a problem that's all of our problems.
Let me see if there are questions from the audience.
Going back to David's comment in the cost of engineering, but it's also seen as
when they're just passing on a 10 or 15% administrative bill onto that. So the municipality is, until the state figures out the revenue sharing and all that, they aren't going to give up those. David's point before of how many developers or, builders have gotten development impact fees back, it doesn't exist because they're holding on to every dollar they can. So unless you can figure out another revenue stream, it's not going to change anytime soon.
You answered your question in your question, and that is the shared revenue reform that we keep hearing about. Whoever's idea it was, doesn't matter. But you're right. It's all about dollars and cents. I know for a fact some municipalities that are balancing budgets with those fees. Building permit fees are a really, really good example. So I completely agree. When I said earlier, it's about priorities. I mean, add that to the top of the list. I firmly believe there's going to be shared revenue reform because there has to be. Municipalities are dying on the vine, counties are dying on the vine, especially the farther north you get, or city and county of Milwaukee. But every chance they get to grab revenue, they take it. And you can't blame them. These revenue caps have been in place for 15 years. They're doing exactly what they were designed to do. But now it's time for a reform that will hopefully help resolve that. But then the municipality and the county has to actually live up to that when they get the new revenue. That'll be the real telling part, and I'm not convinced it'll happen, but we'll see.
So there's a question for David and Josh. What if the county said in 3 instances, could be in Hartford, Jackson, Slinger, we will have a regulatory window within the next 2 years or X number period of time that says you build your stuff here and you will get the Zoom permit or whatever you do. It could sunset after a year and a half or two, but basically create an opportunity window from a regulatory standpoint for investment, for workforce, and for occupancy. And say, this is not forever. Regulatory window, you come in here, you build, you get a Zoom permit.
I mean, I think that's a step in the right direction. It helps because again, we're talking that risk reward thing that I mentioned earlier. this industry changes quickly. Like we were booming up until June. And then when those rates doubled overnight, that literally just killed everything. And your risk tolerance, changes. Like for me, for example, I went into last year, I had 0 homes in inventory. I'm like, I got to build some stock. I got to build some inventory. So I'm starting to build them. And then all of a sudden the rates go up and now I'm sitting with all these houses and I can't get rid of them. And so speed helps. So if you can speed up the process, you can, reduce those risk factors. That certainly is, something I think we would be interested in. But I think we got to go bigger in that we've got to make this process faster, easier, shorter, and more certainty. Certainty is a huge thing for us in the industry because, like I said, every single place you go to is a completely different set of rules and a different set of, whole different ball game. And you almost have to relearn everything you knew every single time when you go to a different area.
I think it's exactly the type of conversation we need to have. I really do. I think incentivizing has to be the motivator. I don't think mandates from the state make a ton of sense. But one thing you got to keep in mind about the state of Wisconsin is, this data is a little bit old from the 2020 census, but we're the 10th most populous state in the country back in 2010. And we have the 20th most populous state in the country and the 10th most units of government. We love government in this state. And because of that, we have lots of regulation and everything that you described with this town does it this way and that village does it this way and this city does it this way. It screams for deregulation and standardization, and incentives, I believe, are how you do it. Because if you try to mandate it from the state of Wisconsin, the reason we love so much government here in Wisconsin, I think in part, at least so many units of government, is because it creates very much local control. The village of Richfield has one attitude for what it wants to see its community to be compared to the village of Jackson, compared to the city of West Bend. I think there's good stuff in that, but if you can incentivize away the bad and incentivize the good, I think you hit the nail on the head. Again, I sound like a broken record, but it's a matter of where are our priorities.
Need to elect a lot more Joshes in our municipalities. Get rid of the fiefdom.
So I'm gonna leap in because we've got 5 minutes left. I'm gonna make a statement and let you guys go down the line and you can each interact with it. Series of statements. So I think part of the magic of what Josh has done in Washington County is create a process in which he can go in and say, well, here's a place where we could tune it down. I think part of the magic of David's presentation is giving everybody a long list of things where he says, here's a piece you could change, here's a piece you could change. If what we need is a process in which the developers, the government, city councils, et cetera, come together and find the place where they say, it's in my best interest to do this. The challenge to some extent with the it's in my best interest is we haven't successfully defined that for people because they may not have enough information. In my business for years, you always said the old saying, you got to see it to believe it. In my business, you have to believe it to see it, okay? People have to understand that their problem is on the line, that their well-being is on the line. We talk about affordable housing and the challenge comes in trying to cite it, but we don't always engage with the challenge. And NIMBY is a terrible thing, but sometimes people are making a rational judgment. You're going to affect the value of their house, et cetera. And we don't want to engage that. We just leave that alone. Okay. No, you're not as good a person as I am because, except it's your house, it's your investment. We should be prepared to deal with all of that. And so I think the question of the public buying in to the need for all of these things and understanding the centralness of housing to that process and retention to that process to their best interest is a big piece of the equation. At McNally, you got to believe it to see it, which means we need more and more examples of that going on. So where do we go from here? And Adam, I'm going to let you take it and we'll go straight down that way.
Yeah, I would agree, John. You need to see that need. Kind of going back to some other points, it's not necessarily that Manitowoc thinks that downtown revitalization is going to be the key point. I get where you're coming from, but what we're hearing is from our employers who have the quality jobs right now, they can't get their people. And it's always been a discussion on what is the appropriate role of the city. Is it creating jobs. Well, we work with our industrial parks to get people and jobs here. So we think we're doing okay on that. It's always a work in progress. So we've got that. Number two, if we have the open jobs, why are people not coming here? What we're hearing are because of trailing spouses or other factors, they don't want to live in Manitowoc. So we're looking at ways to improve Manitowoc as a perception. Leading into that, we get people who want to move here and then they're looking for a house and there is absolutely no houses on the market. I think if you were to do a real estate search for Manitowoc right now, you'd be lucky if you got a dozen houses that are available within the city limits right now. And of those, probably 6 are so far gone that no one in the right mind is going to touch, and 3 are probably way above anything that's affordable. So it's really a struggle. So that's what's led us to housing. And then now that's why we're trying to figure that out. So again, all about priorities. We prioritize jobs for probably 50 years. Well, that seems to be working. Then we're prioritizing quality of life. We're getting momentum there. Now we have to prioritize housing.
And to his point, the quality of life has changed by that investment we made in downtown. It was contagious we started having development and the city was giving $25,000 facade grants. And if your building was on a corner, you got $50,000. Now that we got a new program in the works that if you're in a downtown development and you try to get a building permit, you can't get one without fire suppression. So we're trying to find a way to put fire suppression in our downtown buildings and where the city helps us with that. So it is amazing to see what Manitowoc has become in the last 5 years in our downtown and where we're headed. And it's exciting to be part of it. So I think we're on the right track. I mean, I took a blight building that was worth $300,000. I put in 6 condos, 4 commercial spaces, and the city put $360,000 worth of TIF to make the project work, $50,000 worth of facade grant, and then they bought a building and put a parking lot in, and I bet you that was between $500,000 and $600,000. And they helped with infrastructure on the road, so they put almost $1 million into my investment. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. And now that property is worth $4 million, and I had my first meeting with my homeowners association, and they all said, "What is your taxes?" Like, man, they almost fell over because that building is generating revenue now. I mean, it is really, in the amount of people coming to downtown to hang out, it has been a game changer. So We're on the right path.
Great. Gordon, and then I'm going to have to really skip because I'm running tighter than I realized.
I'll just focus on people. The people problem that we're facing is going to get worse before it gets better. That's going to continue to be a challenge. Retention is the new recruitment. I think we've heard that. And I think that holds true. And I think as the state looks at how do we keep more people here, we got to maximize the bodies we have, looking at things like expungement reform. I know the laborers, we partner with institutions that are going to be releasing people back into the community to try to get them in the apprenticeship pipeline. And that's the kind of stuff that we need to be doing.
Great. Thank you. Pete?
Making the communities attractive. I mean, West Bend is go down by the river and look at both sides of the river. It's beautiful. Young, the Eisenbahn Trail is vibrant. Things are happening in Hartford too, with their downtown and Slinger. Back to David was talking about younger people than high school kids. Last week I had a meeting with Jay Fisher, the Boys and Girls Club. How can we get his hundreds of students up here to see what other careers look like? So we're doing our part there. The whole thing, the tech colleges are there to respond to, we're on the appointment, work with the employers. If there is a demand for this, we can be nimble and we can start programs to satisfy with whatever need is out there. I'll give you an example. We started a truck driving program in about 8 months, which has been very successful for one of our local trucking companies. So we're there to help not only Moraine Park, any of the 16 technical colleges in the state.
Super. Josh?
Total labor and construction costs. I think the solution that I mentioned earlier, we feel like we've moved the ball one rotation, which means we've got a whole hill we got to go down yet. The rest of the hill is inventorying every cost from start to finish of a development. Regulatory costs, labor costs, investment costs, carrying costs, realtor costs. We have a handle on what all of that is today. I think we have to be working with every one of those sectors and saying, how do we mitigate it as best we can? We're not trying to prevent profit. We're not trying to stop people from making a living. But if we want to solve this problem, every single industry